Welcome back to our token-based authentication course. In this lesson, we're going to handle user login. We're going to create a component for user login and then move over into the Vuex store to handle some other tasks. This will be very similar to the previous lesson. We're then going to create a helper file to isolate some of that Vuex code. Let's get started. We'll first start by creating the login user component, which will look something like this. We'll head into our views directory and create a new login user.vue file. And we'll scaffold out the component. And we know in terms of its data that it needs to be taking in the user's email and password. Up in the template, I'm just going to paste in some code, which you can get below the video. We have two inputs bound to the email and password data. And when this form is submitted, that will trigger our login method, which we will write below. So we will scroll down. And that login method is going to be dispatching a Vuex action called login, which we haven't yet written. When dispatching, it'll send a payload with the user's email and password. And then we want to use the router to push them or redirect them to the dashboard route. As a side note, right now we are assuming the login is successful. In a future lesson, we'll look at handling invalid login attempts. Now we can head into the Vuex store so we can write that login action. It's going to behave very similarly to the register action, so similar that we will just copy and paste it and only change the endpoint to login. Now when this is dispatched, it'll make an Axios post request to our server's login endpoint, sending along the user's credentials that they just gave us from that login user component. So now let's take a moment to visualize what's happening on the server side here. So on the client side, in our Vue app, we're making that post request to the login endpoint. How the server is going to handle that is it will take the credentials that we sent along, which include the email and password of our user, and it checks to see if that matches what's currently stored in our user.json, in our mock database. If everything matches, it sends us a responsive user data, including a JWT token that it just created for us. That brings us back to Vuex, where we will do 3 steps. First, we'll store the user data in our state, then store a copy in local storage, and finally add the token to the Axios header. So going back into our Vuex code, that's essentially what we're doing here. We're taking that response from the server and sending it along as we commit the set user data mutation, which looks like this. We're familiar with this from the last lesson. It's simply setting the user state, storing a copy of that user data in local storage, and then taking the token from it and putting it in the Axios header. We're just about ready to check to see if this all works, but we first need to add login user as a route. So we'll head into the router.js file, import that component, and then add it to our routes array. Now we can check the browser, and if we go to the login route in our app, we do see our component showing up. With the way that our mock database is set up, we're only able to store one user at a time. Again, this is not a production-ready solution. So when we log in here, we need to make sure that we're logging in with a user that is currently stored in the user.json file. When we hit login, we are successfully redirected to the dashboard and our private events are showing, so everything is working out. If we look in the network tab, we can see that we did make that login call as well as the dashboard call. And if we investigate inside here, we can see we indeed set the token within the authorization header. Perfect. Currently, if we want to access the register or login routes, we have to manually type that URL in. So now let's add some router links to make those routes easily accessible from within our application. So we'll head into our home component and essentially create a welcome message. We'll say, to use this app, you'll need to, and then we'll create our first router link, which will say login, and this will route to the login route. Then we'll type or and create another router link, which will say register and point to the register route. Now checking this in the browser, at the home page, we see this welcome message, and the user can click directly to the register route and the login route. But what if a user is at the register route and realizes they already have an account and they need to go actually log in instead? They'd have to click back and then go to the home page to click on the login link. So to smooth out the user experience, we can actually put router links on the bottom of the login and register components themselves. Let's take a look at implementing that. So we will head into the login user component and add a router link at the bottom of this form. Inside it, we'll write, don't have an account, register. And this router link will point to the register route. We'll copy this because we will paste it into the register user component at the bottom of the form here. And we will change this to already have an account, log in, and point to the login route. Great, so now if we check the browser and we go to the login route but realize we need to register, we can click here. Or if we're at the register route and realize we need to log in, we can click this link. Now our user experience is a lot more smooth and convenient. We can also add an additional login nav button. So we'll head into our components directory and open up the app nav file. And inside here, we'll add a router link that says login, which will point to the login route. And we'll add a class of button to style this link like a button. Now in the app, we see this login button, just like we've seen in a lot of web applications before, which the user can click on to pull up that login route. Again, this is just another simple way to improve our user interface. So we're making great progress, but what if a user is already logged in? They probably shouldn't be seeing prompts to log in since they're already logged in. So we can hide those prompts when the user is definitely logged in. So let's implement that now. So by adding a vif to this div, we can show this only if we don't have a user in our state. Technically, this will work, but we're going to implement a different solution with the goal of keeping our templates as simple as possible. There's a couple of reasons for this. One, we might have a team where a designer is also using these templates, and they might not know any Vuex. So simplifying the code can make it more readable for our team. Also, with the way this is written, we're depending on the Vuex store to be written in a certain way. But as our store grows, and as we rename things and move things around, the structure of our store is going to change. So we would have to rewrite the code inside of all of these vif statements. So long story short, there's a better way to do this, which we will implement right now. Our first step is to create a logged in getter. So we'll head into our Vuex store file, add the getters property, and the logged in getter will take in the state and return bang bang state.user. If this double exclamation point syntax is unfamiliar to you, just know that it will return the truthiness or falsiness of the value. In other words, if our user state is null, this will return false. If we have some user data in that state, it will return true. Great, now that we have that getter, we can start reorganizing our Vuex code in order to use the getter efficiently. Inside of our src directory, we will create a Vuex folder and move the store file within it, and also create a new helpers.js file. As you might assume, we're going to import a Vuex helper into here, specifically map getters. Now this file will export a const called authComputed, and you'll understand why we're naming it like this in just a moment. And inside here, we're going to mix in map getters and use it to map to our logged in getter. Then we'll head into our home directory and import authComputed from our Vuex helpers file. Then we'll create a computed property and mix in auth computed, which gives us access to everything that lives within that, such as our logged in getter. So in the v-if, we'll change this to not logged in. Great. Now we can copy this code and then paste it into our app nav component, which then gives this component access to the logged in getter. So we'll create a v-if statement on the router link and say not logged in here as well. Now we should only be seeing these router links if a user is not logged in. And we just have to do one more thing before we check this out in the browser. We'll head into our main.js file and adjust the path here, since now this lives in the Vuex folder. Great, now let's check it out. We can check this out in the browser by logging in, and there we go. Once we're logged in, the button in the navbar disappears, and if we head to the home route, that entire message with those router links has also disappeared. Awesome. Great job. We have now implemented the ability for a registered user to log back into their account. In the next lesson, we'll look at the steps required to log out a user. See you in there.
But as our store changes, but as our store grows and we rename things such a lot of we. But as our store grows and we rename things and move things around within our store.